Thanks everyone for joining us for yet another podcast with Nakinoku's Startup Life. It's been a little bit of a hiatus since our last podcast. We've been busy at work producing a bunch of samples for the Future of Food, which was a local event that we had, as well as for a box company here, Good Food Brands. So it's been very busy, very exciting time for us because that's a couple of new channels. And actually, I'd love to introduce you all to Amy Andes, who is a partner of ours, actually. If you've had the Banzo Butter that was in both of those sample packs and also on our website now. Amy is the face and the person behind Banzo Butter. So, Amy, thanks for being with us today. I'd love to start it off by maybe telling everyone kind of the premise or the background to Banzo Butter. It's a very unusual product. I know some people may have picked it up and just gone like, "What's garbanzo-based bean butter? What's the deal with that?" So I'd love for you to kind of maybe tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I'm super excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me on this. So our little company, Banzo Brands, formerly known as Spark Snacks, started when I was in grad school, and I was in grad school for 4 years doing my PhD in food science. And so about my second year in, I got bit by the entrepreneur bug. And after working with like a different group of students on a product development competition, um, I was like super excited to get into my kitchen and start creating my own innovations. And so that's where Banzo Butter came out of, which is, if you don't know, a garbanzo bean spread that's similar to nut butter in texture and taste, but obviously does not have any nuts and is free of the top 14 food allergens, which is one of our big things that we showcase. And we like to make sure that there's a space for people with dietary restrictions in all conversations. And hoping what we're doing is we're hoping to bring more snack foods to the market that more people can eat.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I personally have an experience with this as well. There was one time we had cooked a Japanese curry for family members, you know, a family that we were visiting, and a family member had a nut allergy, and I don't, you know, it wasn't labeled on the product at all. We looked at all the labels; it wasn't on the product, but for whatever reason, it did trigger an allergen response from her, and we had to use an EpiPen at that point. That kind of traumatized me a little bit and made me want to make sure that I check the labels. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very scary experience and it happens really quickly. And so hopefully, you know, people with dietary restrictions can enjoy our snack foods without concern of having to use their EpiPen. And then also they can, you know, not be excluded from a normal snacking situation,
Yeah.
where a lot of brands, you know, will contain certain allergens, and so you have to bring your own snack to a sleepover or
Yeah.
to a birthday party. We're hoping to make less of those situations.
Yeah, and I don't think the majority of our listeners may know what the experience is like of never having tasted peanut butter or never having, you know, for my mother, she's got a shrimp allergy. She developed that later on in life, but, you know, there are others who may have a shellfish allergy that never have had the experience of eating some shrimp that, you know, you might consider as normal. So it's interesting as we start thinking about that food inclusivity, you know, identifying with people who may have a different set of dietary restrictions than us, and understanding what they're going through, and their restrictions as well, right? So, and I think, you know, that dovetails really cleanly into, you know, right now, if people pick up that sample, we have a statement on the back, unfortunately, that says that this product was produced in a shared kitchen environment. And you know, I'd love to talk a little bit more about that, particularly because, you know, we had this one experience that we shared with you where we were in our shared kitchen space, and, you know, one day we walked in, and I like to clean down the three compartment sink before I start, and I was in there. I'm starting to see all the leftover nuts actually that were stuck at the bottom of the sink, and it no no calling. I'm not calling anyone out, or that's not the point. The point is it just happens in a naturally in a shared kitchen environment. People are making different kinds of food products. There's going to be residue from some of that stuff left in the shared equipment. So we can't fully attain that complete allergen free environment that we'd love to kind of cook in. And maybe you can speak to that as well. You're also producing in a shared kitchen environment. Like, do you run into that sort of issue as well?
Yes, we do. And I'm sure like every shared kitchen across the country does. And I know that that makes some people really nervous when approaching a new snack. And so basically, I started off just in my kitchen making my product. And obviously, for like legal reasons, you can't really sell food out of your kitchen unless it's like a cottage food,
Yep.
which I bean butter was not on the list, so I assumed it was similar to nut butter, which is not legal to sell without going through a kitchen that's licensed. And so we found one, but before my search began for commercial kitchens, I was really, really intent on finding a kitchen that was free from the top 14 food allergens, which is like near impossible. Um, it I spent a year and a half talking to people on and off. There were a handful that I still like remain in contact with because the only reason I couldn't use them is because it was too expensive for like a first trial run. And so hopefully when I get my feet moving a little faster, they'd be able to produce my jars at a quicker pace like a co-packer would. But just to like get my idea out there, I was told by so many different mentors, like you got to stop sitting on it and you got to just commit to doing the commercial kitchen. And so my biggest hesitations were that like as a brand, I wanted to make sure that we came across that like this is our mission is to be allergen friendly, and we're not just another brand that's like putting that on our label. Like we actually care about it. I'm a food scientist. I got a certification called PCQI, Preventive Controls Qualified Individual, in order to make sure that I was making the right allergen control plans for the commercial kitchen I'm using. And that's like a step that not a lot of people take. And it's just one of the things that like keeps me up at night. So I just want to make sure we're doing the best we can. So we started in a commercial kitchen, and one of the big things that was important to me is that the equipment that we needed to use that is shared, we clean very like religiously.
Yep.
Obviously, we don't know what is going in that machine, maybe like the day before that, people are using as well, since it's a shared kitchen. But we do limit like we only really use one piece of equipment from that facility. It really is just a place where we can make everything. We use our own bowls. We keep them on our shelves. Obviously, with what you said about the sink before, you don't know how clean people were before you with the
Yeah.
sink. So we just try to do the best that we can. And then it's important for us to still put that disclaimer on our label, because we don't want people to be like, this is free of the top 14 food allergens, and then them to get sick. If anything, God forbid, anything was cross contacted with our food, because obviously we're not putting it into it, but
Yep.
there are so many different factors that can affect our final product. So that's why we put it on the label. I think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Absolutely.
For most brands, honestly, just to be nice to the people that are reading the labels.
Yep.
Especially, I know a few of my friends have to like contact companies because if it's not on their label, they want to make sure before they eat it. And so just to save them some work, it's really just a nice thing to put it on the label. And then also other people, like if you're bringing some food to a party and you can see on the label, that it contains a certain allergen, then you're not going to bring it to a party that has, that your friend has bad
That
peanut
allergy.
allergy, if there's peanuts listed.
Yeah.
So it's just helpful to have that labeling.
And also, something that you had mentioned to me when we were speaking about this previously, completely organically, not for a podcast, was, there's different sensitivities that people have. Some might be mild, some might be very, very severe. So putting this, letting them make that risk-based decision by putting the statement on the packaging, I think that gives them the power, right? Gives the consumer the power to say, actually, I've got a very severe allergy and I don't want to take this chance. Versus, I've got a more mild allergy. As long as the equipment is clean and it's not declared on the label as an allergen that's present in the food, I can have that. You know, people with allergies know what their limits are, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. I think unless you're really new to having an allergy, which I have a ton of friends who are just getting food allergies later in life, so that's obviously a trial. But most people and their families know what their limit is. So, for example, some people that I know are totally fine eating Banzo butter. They have the most severe nut allergies of anybody that I've met, and basically they just can't ingest peanuts. That's their limit. But they could, if it says maybe produced in a facility with peanuts, um, they will take the chance and go for it. And I've never gotten sick from it. However, there are other people that are more strict about that, which I totally respect
Yes.
because why would you want to go into anaphylaxis?
Right.
Um, so I think that most people, like you said, know their limits and will ask certain questions to companies. And I think it's really important that companies know how to answer those questions.
Yeah.
And it starts very early. It starts from ingredient sourcing,
Yeah.
because if you're ingredient sourcing from, a warehouse that has a ton of other food products in it, then that is where really it starts. Like your cross contact could start there.
Right.
And then it could begin in your kitchen too. It could be where you're shipping, really every step of the process. And a lot of people will ask those questions. So it's important to have paperwork and really know who you're buying your ingredients from and how they're storing their ingredients.
Yeah, I know. I know regulators often get a bad rap, but there's a reason why the FDA asks us to do supplier controls, right? It's not just so that they can have some extra paperwork to sit on. It's because there's dangers in that supply chain, and we need to make sure that we control that and buy from approved suppliers. It's really
Mhm.
interesting. We can talk a little bit more, I think, about some of the controls that we have to put in place. But before we do, I just want to make that statement to anyone listening that we are aware of and want to get to a stage where we're completely allergen free. That is our desire. That's our hope. If this takes off, Amy, if we start selling a lot of Banzo butter, I know that'll be the first thing that you'll do is like try and find that space that's completely allergen free. For us, that would look like a private kitchen space so that we could actually kind of sequester our own equipment. By the way, that's another thing that just like you, we have our own equipment. Nobody else produces on it but us. We bring it into a private space, and we produce in there. If we find any potential issues with the previous tenant who had been using it, we wipe down. So that day that we found that particular issue, we made sure we rinsed out all of the what do you call it, the leftover material. Then we washed it down, wiped it down, made sure as we could get it as clean as possible before we continued with our production process. And we hadn't even used the 3 compartment sink before that because we do our inspection before. But now getting to the next topic of like some other controls, one thing I know is making sure that your production equipment is either NSF rated or stainless steel so that it can actually be completely wiped down and clean, and there's no like potential for any materials that might remain on that surface. There's no like what's it called, what's the word, like some sort of absorption into the material that potentially could cause contact again, right?
Yeah. So I don't know too much about equipment, but I do know there are like certain pieces of equipment. Like I've tried to purchase a sifter, um, and it is just so hard to clean that after you put like flour on it or
Right.
something. And so if you're saying you're like gluten free and then someone's sharing the sifter with you, like that's one equipment I just would not recommend sharing with people. But there's other ones, you're right, that are like stainless steel and that are easily wipeable, not porous, that like they can't absorb the protein, the food allergy proteins, that are definitely less of a risk.
Yeah. And maybe it's also worth mentioning again for our for our colleagues in the food industry that sanitizing is not the same as cleaning, because I think that's, for even for consumers sometimes there's a mixture there. Sanitizing kills, potentially inhibits bacteria, but doesn't clear the surface of allergens, right? That's something I
Correct.
found
Yeah,
out early.
that's a good distinction. Just like they say, don't just put hand sanitizer on your hands. It won't kill COVID. Like wash your hands with soap and water. Do the same to protect it against cross contact. I actually wanted to mention really quickly. So a lot of times I hear people like interuse the terminology cross contact and cross contamination.
Right.
So I thought it could be a good teaching point
Sweet.
that cross contact is strictly about food allergens. And so when we're talking about food allergens coming into contact um, with the food that you're preparing, that would be cross contact. And then cross contamination is more referencing bacteria and pathogens. And so when something is cross contaminated, you could get really sick, as in like a foodborne illness.
Right. Versus, yeah, and that blew my mind when I first started learning. You talked about the PCQIA. One of the first things I did when we wanted to start this business was I did the Better Process Control School, the PCQIA, I had the HACCP training, GMPs. I did the whole slate of them because I
Mm-hmm.
kind of wanted to know what it is I was getting my hands involved in. I didn't want to potentially make somebody sick. And one of the first things that they talk about is biological versus like biological hazards versus chemical hazards, and allergens are actually a chemical hazard, which I was like, what? That didn't make any sense to me because it's part of food, but it's actually a chemical hazard, right?
Yeah, that always trips me up too. I'm always just like, wait, is it biological? Is it? Because it's like a protein. So you're
Right.
like, but yeah,
Yeah.
was always interesting to me as well.
It's classified as a chemical hazard, which was like, okay, cool. And then there's obviously physical hazards too, which, just so everyone listening is on the same page, physical hazards are like shards of glass. When you're bottling, there might be shards of glass or a little bit of tin that might have cut off from a can, something like that. They could be physical hazards. So there's actually metal detectors in large facilities to make sure there's no physical hazards that go out. But chemical hazards are a lot harder to control because, again, you have to make sure you wipe down all the surfaces. Like there's no way to sort of, at least for small businesses, to test those things. You just kind of have to make sure that you're doing a good job of wiping things down.
Yeah, bigger companies do have like swab
Yeah.
tests, which is honestly the end goal for me.
Yeah.
Just knowing that, your product absolutely does like passes those tests
Mm.
and doesn't contain those food allergens is like a must when you can afford it.
Yes.
I wish that everybody could afford it. I think it would save a lot of trips to the hospital and fear about cross contact, but hopefully that's where the food industry is going.
Yeah, and I hope things like IFT, right? Like, I mean, we talk about how we can be more innovative and help small businesses. This is a great way that, help us start to address some of these hazards before they become a hazard that's already been in packaged food and gotten out into commerce. But yeah, I think it's really good to talk to some of our colleagues who are also in food production to make sure not only are we applying the right controls to make sure things are clean, but also labeling. It's like I think I've seen more than I would like of small businesses that are sort of packaging food but not declaring, making those statements, and that's very, very dangerous, I think, going forward, because someone with a severe allergy might come into contact with that food, and potentially, we have people's lives in our hands. It's very, it's a deep weight of responsibility. So, any thoughts from you in terms of like for us as small businesses, how do we kind of deal with this, and how do we do a good job of making sure we're declaring all those things?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I was actually going to mention before with the commercial kitchens, it's super important that people take the training on allergen protocols very seriously. It takes like one person, just clicking through the course or not actually paying attention, because most of the commercial kitchens do require you to have allergen training. And so if you're paying attention, you shouldn't be leaving like nuts in the sink and doing things
Right.
like that. So I think that's a first step to make sure that people are aware that this is actually a very like global problem that people face every time they eat a snack. And so just knowing that it has a lot of weight is important. And then I think that the programs could go more into detail on food label law. I know that a lot of startups have asked me for help in that specific category because I was just in school. So it's
Mm,
like a little fresh in my mind. And I took a food law course. Um, it's really hard to read the government regulations online, I will admit. It usually like you read something and you're like, oh, great, we could do this. And then 2 lines later, it sounds like it contradicts itself. And you're like, I need to get help before I like do something wrong. But I think what is important because part of the part of the label that people have started seeing like includes this ingredient or contains this ingredient, that is actually legally necessary if it's
yeah.
one of those top 9 allergens. Um, but if but it's not necessary to have the um, produced in a facility statement from what I remember
Yeah,
from class. And
that's correct.
so a lot of people don't. A lot of people do just for liability sake. Some people don't really know which allergens are in the facility, so they leave it off. It's better to just say, like, it could come into contact with the common food allergens. When people are reading those labels, if they want to eat your food, they'll come ask you before they just eat it.
Mm.
They're not just going to take a chance and get sick. But it is really important that you like know the answers to those questions. And if you don't, then obviously you're losing a customer, you're losing some trust in your business.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I think that if I could leave our listeners with some resources as well, be aware that there are food science extensions at some of the major universities, from University of North Carolina, Georgia, University of Georgia, I believe UGA has one. Uh, who else? Anyone in Illinois that you're aware of? Maybe. I don't think so.
I know Cornell.
Cornell does. Yeah.
Ohio State also had, I obviously am
Uh,
biased because I went here for grad school, but Ohio State has a really good commercial kitchen and
mhm.
program that really helps entrepreneurs learn HACCP, learn different pieces of business as well.
It's funny, we were connecting with an OSU, and for a while we thought it was Ohio State. It was actually Oregon State. So they also
Yeah, they
have
also have food
a
science.
food science one as
My
well. And
advisor went there.
yeah, and they're pretty big as well. And then you've got University of Wisconsin. I think those are the big names in the field. But oh yeah, right, of course. Texas, I think A&M has one as well, pretty large
Yes.
one. So wherever you are in the country, there should be a food science extension pretty close to you. And so far, I have found they're incredibly helpful. They're incredibly open to talking to small business because that's their entire, that's their reason for existence. So they are very good about doing that. So if you have any questions about the stuff, you can reach out to friends in the field like us. I mean, absolutely. Or you can reach out to those food science extensions. But the thing you shouldn't do is just guess and go with it, because we are dealing with people's lives here. So it is very, very important that we give consumers the information to make the right choices for themselves. Amy, thanks so much for taking the time. I know we're at the end of our 20 minutes. It was a very cool discussion about allergens. I know we've had this like separately, just completely organically, because it's something I think that's on my mind as well. But we wish you all the best with Banzo Butter. Thank you for sampling with us. And if whoever's listening, if you want to taste this garbanzo-based bean butter, come onto our website. We'll have a link to go ahead and taste it, and then hopefully just buy it. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you. Can I
yeah.
can I leave one last word?
Sure, go for it. Absolutely.
I just, whoever's listening, I think if you can have one takeaway from this is just to be more mindful about food in your life and the people that you're surrounded with. So if you're having a wedding, think about those people that have dietary restrictions coming to your wedding that don't just want to eat a piece of lettuce because they had no other option. If you have kids, think about there's certain sport fields and arenas that have food inclusive options. So really it's becoming a bigger movement, food inclusivity. And so I would just say, be an ally, be less ignorant about it in society.
That's awesome. That's a great way to end it. Thank you so much, Amy, and we'll definitely be in touch, and we'll hopefully have you back on as well. Thank
Yeah,
you so
thank
much.
you.
Take care.
Hey Carl, bringing that old grill out again?
Yeah, but this year's different.
Not with that burnt out thing. I got myself the Mega Ultra Grill 3000.
It's not about the make and size of the equipment, but what you bring to the barbecue. It's all about flavor this year.
I don't get it. No baby backs barbecue this summer?
No man, you gotta check out Nakinoku. They opened me up to a whole world of flavors right to my door. Plus you're not creating waste with small sample sizes. With every meal, it could be something new. Today we're trying Chicago's honey barbecue sauce.
Sounds delicious. When can I come over?
With Nakinoku, taste and see new flavors whenever you want. No subscription fees and less waste. Small commitments, big flavors.